This is Bloomberg Businessweek Daily, reporting from the magazine that helps global leaders stay ahead, with insight on the people, companies, and trends shaping today's complex economy, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Businessweek Daily with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec, live on Bloomberg Radio, television, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals.
And a very good afternoon, everybody, across Bloomberg platforms. Welcome to Bloomberg Businessweek Daily. I'm Carol Massar along with Tim Stenovec. We're live at Bloomberg headquarters in New York City. We've got the S&P 500 headed for its longest slump.
It's okay. You can invent that. We know what you mean.
It feels like a slump. It is a slump, and it is the S&P headed for its longest slump since August. In fact, we've got the S&P 500 down for a fourth consecutive day. We are seeing some selling in those world's largest tech companies, but we're off our worst levels of the session.
We are. If we take a look at the indexes right now, the S&P 500 down 0.4%, the NASDAQ down 0.7%, the Dow down 0.7. Charlie Pellet is going to have more in just a few minutes, but we were down more than a percentage point on some of these a little earlier in the trade.
Yeah, so much of the selling that we've seen as of late is really market watchers increasingly questioning that AI trade. Among them, JP Morgan's Daniel Pinto speaking earlier today at Bloomberg Africa Business Summit in Johannesburg.
It's possible there is probably a correction there. And that correction will also create a correction in the rest of the segments in the S&P and in the industry, because you are probably, in order to justify these valuations, you are considering a level of productivity that it will happen, but it may not happen as fast as the market is pricing.
All right, slump or slump, whatever you call it, we've definitely seen a new narrative when it comes to the AI trade. That, of course, was JP Morgan's Daniel Pinto speaking earlier today at the Bloomberg Africa Business Summit in Johannesburg. Meantime, behemoths continue, Tim, to spend heavily on artificial intelligence.
Yeah, Microsoft and NVIDIA committing to invest up to a combined $15 billion. That would be in Anthropic. It's a move that ties the AI developer closer to two of the biggest backers for its rival OpenAI. Remember, OpenAI has ChatGPT. Anthropic, founded by Dario Amodei and a number of other people, including some people formerly of OpenAI. They have the Claude LLM.
I feel like that's circular financing.
That's the first thing I thought of when I saw this news.
We just keep building on it.
All right. Here's some money, and then you're going to spend it with us.
All right, more on the trade this hour and the AI trade and all of that.
Maybe we call it vendor finance. I don't know. What do we call it?
I don't know. Let's work on that.
Okay.
Right?
Vendor financing is another term.
Let's get a focus group and think about that one. Hey, top of mind for us is certainly what's going on in the trade. We're also going to get into what we've been seeing when it comes to domestic politics, a big ruling when it comes to Texas redistricting. We are going to get to that in just a moment. We're also going to get to some news focus, I should say, maybe more correctly, on what's been going on at the White House today. And that is a meeting between MBS and President Trump, why oil isn't front and center at those discussions. We're talking, of course, about Saudi Arabia's Mohammed bin Salman. So we're going to get into that a little bit later on.
Yeah, Wald's going to be joining us in just a few minutes. Plus, Dr. Adam Posen, president of the Peterson Institute for International Economics, on these evolving global relationships and the economies and the economics that shape it.
Always behind it. Also, Andy Marsh, CEO of Plug Power, on the tough road to hydrogen power. And then a market reset, market sell-off, market crash. How do you describe it? We're going to get into that with Stephanie Guild, Tim, Chief Investment Officer at Robinhood Markets.
All that and more coming up over a packed hour right here on Bloomberg Businessweek Daily. First up, though, a check of the day's trade and top business stories. Here he is, watching the markets closely, Charlie Pellet.
Hi, thank you very much, Tim and Carol. Indeed, down day here, but significant change in that Paramount Warner Brothers Discovery story that we told you about last hour. Paramount now says the Variety report of a Warner Brothers bid is, quote, inaccurate. A Paramount spokesperson has issued a statement about the Variety report. Warner Brothers and Paramount shares have paired their gains. Right now, we got Paramount Skydance up 2.1%. Warner Brothers Discovery up by 3.4%. Stay with Bloomberg for the latest on this developing story. The other story that broke in the past couple of hours, Meta Platforms winning a key lawsuit after a federal judge ruled that the company's acquisitions of the photo-sharing app Instagram and messaging service WhatsApp do not violate U.S. antitrust law. It is a down day today for the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, S&P down 25, down 0.4%. We've got the Dow down 0.7% right now. Again, the S&P down 0.4, NASDAQ down 0.7 with a 10-year yielding 4.12%. Spot gold now higher by 0.7%. West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.3%, $60.70 a barrel, and Bitcoin now up 1.5%, 93,220 on Bitcoin. So the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all declining. Bottom line here, we're slimping along. S&P down by 0.2%. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
I know, slumping, it all works, right?
Keep trying to make Slimp happen, Charlie.
If I can make it a function on the Bloomberg, I'll be really happy. All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. Hey, just moments ago, we got some more news domestically. A federal judge panel ruled that Texas diluted the strength of minority voters in redrawing congressional districts, likely racially gerrymandered, Tim.
The judges granted a preliminary injunction following a trial in October where plaintiffs said the maps unlawfully dismantle 4 minority opportunity districts. That decision comes as Republicans cling to a narrow advantage in the House ahead of the midterm election next year. It follows a July letter from the Justice Department citing racial gerrymandering in the map the state passed. That was back in 2021. With more, we head to the Bloomberg News Dallas Bureau and to Texas Bureau Chief Julie Fine. Julie, certainly a big decision, one that, redhead crossing the Bloomberg terminal, one that could have implications for the 2026 midterm elections as we gear up for those. I'm curious, is this the end, or does this go to the Supreme Court next?
I mean, I would imagine that this will definitely be appealed and could likely end up at the Supreme Court. I mean, first of all, one of the most conservative appeals court is right near us. That is the that's the appellate division in Louisiana. So it could very easily end up there. Obviously, I think this has major implications. When you look at other states, you have California that is talking about redistricting. You have other states that are discussing it as well. This is something that will be paid attention to by the United States of America for sure. Major implications for the midterm elections.
Yeah, it's just kind of fascinating because it does make us think, kind of what's next. We did talk about, you mentioned California, and earlier this month, California voters, Julie, as you know, overwhelmingly approved new congressional lines that could net Democrats up to 5 more seats in next year's House election. So is it tit for tat? Indeed, what happened in Texas is going to happen in California, or not necessarily?
Well, I certainly think so far we have seen this. I mean, Gavin Newsom certainly said we are going to fight fire with fire here. That's what he said, referring to his own state. So, of course, I think people will definitely be paying attention to how this is handled in the courts in Texas. I mean, it's fairly unusual to see redistricting at this time of the year. Generally, you see it every 10 years after there is a census report. So this is something you obviously don't see very often, and you will now see it play out in the court system. And these cases will likely be expedited by the groups filing them because of the midterm elections.
Yeah, but it raises the question about what can actually happen in the next few months or, up to less than a year away, because that's where we are from the midterm elections right now. This is something that has to get done very quickly because this voting is going to happen very soon. These people need to be running right now.
Absolutely. I mean, here in Texas, the midterms are in March. In March is when the primaries are.
Yeah.
The primaries are in March, yes. So the primary elections are in March. So a lot of these people are deciding, first of all, are we going to run again for our current seat that has been redistricted severely? So, yes, obviously you'll see this moving very quickly. You have to remember the redistricting in Texas was just in the summer, and now we're seeing this come down in November.
Yeah, I feel like time has just changed dramatically, or the concept of such. Hey, Julie, thank you so much. Texas Bureau Chief Julie Fine
anytime.
There in our bureau in Dallas. All right, that's the latest on the U.S. home front. Let's get to geopolitics and interesting relationships, if you will, out of the White House today. This is Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is visiting Washington, D.C. for the first time since 2018. That's a trip that came just a few months before the killing of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Now, today, MBS talked about upping investments into the United States from $600 billion to $1 trillion, also about access to sophisticated AI chips, data centers, the Epstein files, conflicts of interest, and the killing of that journalist. All of that, Tim, did come up during the press conference, if you will, and questioning from reporters at the White House.
Yeah, President Trump said the U.S. was likely to approve a defense agreement with the oil-rich kingdom and a civil nuclear deal, while reiterating that Washington would sell F-35 fighters to the country. He also said leaders had discussed the possibility that Saudi Arabia could establish formal diplomatic ties with Israel as part of the Abraham Accords. Here's Mohammed bin Salman and President Trump talking with reporters earlier today at the White House.
We believe in what you're doing, Mr. President, is really creating a lot of good things and good foundation to create more economical growth, more business in America. And it will also your work for the world peace. I believe, Mr. President, today and tomorrow we're going to announce that we are going to increase that $600 billion to almost $1 trillion of investment, real investment and real opportunity by details in many areas. And the agreement that we are signing today in many areas in technology, in AI, in earth materials, magnet, etc., that will create a lot of investment opportunities.
So you are doing that now. You're saying to me now that the $600 billion will be $1 trillion.
Definitely, because what we are signing, it will facilitate that. And
I like that very much.
All right. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman at the White House with President Trump earlier today. This evening, by the way, there's a black tie dinner, not an official state dinner, although at that dinner we did hear Elon Musk would be there.
Tiger Woods reportedly will be there as well.
Yeah, a lot of officials, right? There's also an investment conference planned for tomorrow that executives from companies, including Chevron, Pfizer, they will be attending. So we wanted to kind of put this in perspective, because typically you would see these two kinds of leaders meet and you think energy policy would come up, although it really didn't. Let's get to it with Dr. Ellen Wald. She's president of Transversal Consulting, senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, author of Saudi Inc., joining us from Boca Raton, Florida. Ellen, so good to have you back here. Feels like Saudi Inc. and U.S. Inc. are kind of merging. Tell me about this meeting, because it was kind of fascinating. It really wasn't about conversations around oil or the energy markets.
It was absolutely fascinating, especially if you had an opportunity to watch the press conference live. I think everything from the marble floors to the White House to whether or not Saudi Arabia is going to join the Abraham Accords was covered. What's interesting is the amount of money that Mohammed bin Salman is talking about potentially investing in the United States. And I think the big question on everyone's mind is, where are they getting this money from, given that oil prices are pretty low? And I think the answer really is you have to look at the Saudi investment fund, the PIF, because that's really where they have a lot of their investment dollars and ready to deploy. And it really, that fund is really independent of the price of a barrel of oil. So I think the question of whether Saudi can deliver this money, the answer is yes. But whether they actually will deliver on this is another question. And I do think that a lot of that money is probably earmarked for defense purchases, and that really depends on whether they do go through with this agreement to sell Saudi Arabia F-35s and other defense equipment that is somewhat controversial and hasn't necessarily been sold to Saudi Arabia previously.
Carol mentioned that you're the author of Saudi Inc., The History of Saudi Arabia and Aramco. And I wonder now how successful the Saudi Arabian government has been, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, of diversifying its economy away from oil. Has it been successful?
That is a really great question. And I think the answer is, if you're looking at and you're trying to say, have they achieved the goals that they set out to achieve when they announced their big plan to diversify from oil? The answer is no, they have not really achieved those goals. I think really a lot of those goals were not achievable goals. What they have done is they have introduced some very important changes that I think can certainly help make the Saudi economy more robust over time. We're talking about making it easier for foreigners to visit the country, both for tourism, but also to work, opening up the workspace for women, and important societal changes like that, I think in the long run will help diversify their economy. But if you're asking whether their economy is still very much dependent on the energy industry, the answer is yes. Aramco, on the other hand, has over the past 50 years, I would say, significantly diversified itself from simply an an upstream company that sold a lot of crude oil to a very diverse energy company that has multiple revenue streams. So they're not just dependent on what the price of a barrel of oil is. They make a lot of oil products. They're getting into natural gas. They make money off of trading oil and in the financial sense. And so they're making a lot of money that is not dependent on whether the price of a barrel of oil is $60 or $80.
So I guess this relationship that we are seeing between the United States and Saudi Arabia, I feel like it's always been a bit of a frenemy kind of relationship between the two nations. Having said that, there's been times where it's been stronger, times when it has not. Is this the relationship going forward, in your view?
What's so interesting about the relationship between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia is that Saudi Arabia has a very different view of the relationship than the United States does. In the Saudi mind, the U.S. is a best friend, that they've always been so close, and they've cultivated an entire kind of aura and idea about this friendship. They think the U.S. is a huge ally. If you look at it from the U.S. perspective, Saudi Arabia is, at least it can be, a strategic partner, but Saudi Arabia would not be considered an ally to the United States the same way Great Britain or Canada might be considered an ally. And so I think that leads to very different opinions about what exactly is going to go on. So, whether or not, Saudi Arabia has a defense agreement, yes, traditionally we have had defense agreements, but from the U.S. perspective, that's not always so guaranteed. If it's beneficial to the U.S., then it will happen. But it's not necessarily a guarantee. It's not necessarily this allyship that the Saudis often perceive the relationship to be.
Well, it's interesting when you say Canada and the UK, and in particular Canada, I feel like, it looks almost a friendlier relationship between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia than it certainly does between U.S. and Canada right now. I guess my question really, Ellen, is, are we laying the ground for whoever is in the White House next, be it Democrat or Republican, that this is the relationship, or could it change and get different depending, again, who is in the White House?
I think that there's always kind of a baseline, and you could see that when Trump was kind of fishing for a compliment from MBS, as he's the best president. They've had the best relationship with Trump, and MBS kind of answered that with, well, we've always had, Democrat or Republican, we've always had good relations with presidents of the United States, and then he mentions Reagan as a particularly good one. So I think that MBS is certainly looking at this as he's got to lay the groundwork for his good relationships with presidents that are going to come after Trump, whereas Trump is seeing it as the here and now.
The military balance of power in the Middle East, the potential F-35s that Saudi Arabia could get as a result of making a deal with the United States. President Trump said he would approve selling the F-35 fighter jet to Saudi Arabia. I'm just wondering how that changes the balance of power when it comes to the militaries in the region, especially with regard to Israel, which for years has been a U.S. ally, and also what U.S. interest the U.S. would have an interest in selling F-35s apart from getting the revenue to a U.S. company.
Exactly. I do think from Trump's perspective, he thinks that the F-35s are the greatest airplane ever to be made. And so he loves that everybody wants them. And so it's more of an economic issue. I think from the Pentagon's perspective, they're looking at it as more of a strategic issue. Now, the UAE apparently got assurances they would be able to purchase these when they signed the Abraham Accords, and it was believed that this would also be a condition for Saudi Arabia. I think it's very, very clear now that Saudi Arabia is not going to join the Abraham Accords. They're not recognizing Israel unless there's an assured path towards a Palestinian state. I don't see that happening anytime in the near future. So I think we're kind of going to be at a standstill here. And if the Pentagon has severe concerns about it, I think it may not actually go through as much as Trump wants it to go through.
Is that more tricky, or is it the AI chips that are more tricky? And does Saudi Arabia need both?
The AI chips are very tricky. I do think that that's really what's going to be the focus of this investment meeting and this dinner, is that the PIF wants to make these investments in these firms because that's their way of kind of getting their hands on this technology. I think from the U.S. national security perspective, they don't want their chips to be in any connection with Chinese technology equipment. And so there are serious concerns, cybersecurity concerns there that are going to have to be dealt with. But I do see the PIF potentially making investments in these firms, I don't see necessarily us producing semiconductors and chips in Saudi Arabia, but I do think the Saudis can make a case to try to get data centers in the kingdom, particularly if they can assure the security of the equipment in their country, and also if they offer, basically free land and free energy. I could see that being a very powerful draw.
All right, great stuff. Ellen, thank you so much. Dr. Ellen Wald, president of Transversal Consulting, senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. All right, we're going to stay on global relationships, the economies that drive them, and turn on over to Dr. Adam Posen. He's president of the Peterson Institute for International Economics. He joins us from, I believe, the nation's capital on this Tuesday. Yes, Washington, D.C. Dr. Posen, good to have you back here on Bloomberg and on Bloomberg Businessweek Daily. These relationships, I first got to ask you, watching the relationship, what seems to be a very close relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia, and I think about their economies. How do you see it? What's significant for you here in watching this?
Thank you, Carol, for having me back on Bloomberg Businessweek Daily. I want to pick up on some things you discussed with your previous guest, which is there is a huge economic, leaving aside the national security incentive, for Saudi to behave in this way, in that MBS, the Crown Prince, has very definitely been seeing part of his agenda to try to transition Saudi away from overdependence on export of fossil fuels. And it's the right thing for them to do from the economic perspective. And obviously, Saudi, for many decades, has been accumulating surpluses of cash and trying to invest them. They've been trying to diversify. I wouldn't go quite as far as your previous guest did in extolling how much Aramco's diversified, but they've been trying. I think the deeper integration with the U.S. is a path towards that, and it is a credible path towards that. That's not to say they haven't been doing a lot of good things in terms of domestic investment and on the economic front on liberalization. They have. And I know a lot of very serious money investors who are very excited by this. But just to say this puts them on the path. For the U.S., however, I think it's less important economically. It is more about the security relationship, or at least it should be. There's never been a shortage of people willing to invest in the U.S., or at least with the exception of a few years in the late 70s and early 80s, not since 1900. And that remains the case, even though things are happening to make the U.S. a little less attractive. So for the U.S., I think there has to be more of the security diplomatic conditionality. Just simply getting Saudi investment in the U.S. is not that big a gain.
What type of conditionality, especially in exchange for F-35 state-of-the-art jets?
Well, Tim, I think that's the right question, and I would not say it necessarily needs to be tied to Israel recognition in the Abraham Accords, but it needs to be tied to something of that caliber. So maybe it's something about how they're relating to Iran, or something about the Saudi mutual guarantees with Pakistan, some sort of agreement on how the Saudis will influence Pakistan. Or maybe it's about the investment which the Saudis have indicated they're willing to do in rebuilding Gaza and dealing with what will be refugee issues there. All I'm saying is that it has to be something substantial. But I also think you want the F-35s, of course, are a big carrot, but you also want to think of it in terms of the relationship. And this is what is key, whether it's UK or Saudi or Japan.
Adam, you talk about relationships, and I think about something that came up questioning by reporters of the president and MBS while at the White House, and that is about kind of the relationships that the Trump organization has with Saudi Arabia on business deals. And we have a story in the Bloomberg about the Trump organization planning a luxury resort in the Maldives with a Saudi Arabian partner. It's just one case. I'm just curious, you've watched, you've talked about, you've analyzed different administrations. This kind of what seems to be a mixing melding. I know the president answered the question. He said, I have nothing to do with family business. But how do you see this?
No, I appreciate your asking that, Carol, and I don't want to be mean, but it doesn't matter whether the president literally in the narrow sense has nothing to do with it or not. we had laws, and more importantly, we had norms, and we had expectations from the press, from the public, from the markets, that the U.S. did not deal in family enrichment when you're in public office, let alone when you're the president. Some of your viewers might remember the old John Adams miniseries in which John Adams alienated both his daughter and his son-in-law, or one of his sons and his son-in-law, because he wouldn't advance them while he was in the White House. And what matters is this very strong perception, which is obvious in Qatar, in the United Arab Emirates, and Saudi, but even with the gold that was offered just the other day to the president, that there is this perception that you link things. Now, I don't want to over dramatize this. There are a lot of countries in the world, including Saudi, including Turkey, including China, where this kind of ties go on between the leaders' families and chosen friends and foreign policy and other governments. It's not good, it's not fair, it's wasteful and distortionary, but it's also not the end of the world. Businesses and investors can proceed. But for the U.S., this is, going back to your original question, this is a huge step change. We've not seen anything like this, at least since Teddy Roosevelt, meaning 120 years.
So just to be fair, because we certainly get feedback from our audience, and to say that the president says, I'm not involved, though, and we've had, any president that walks into the White House, Republican or Democrat, certainly has allegiances to industries or so on. I
agree. It's never going to be absolute. And we all know the stories of people going back to Jimmy Carter's brother selling beer, that there's always relatives who try to profit on these things. But so again, this isn't about ascribing malevolent intent, but you want to have a system in place where people expect and feel, particularly investors, but also average citizens expect and feel that this is an exception, not the rule, that you occasionally have the rogue family member, but that on the one hand, policy choices are not being driven and being perceived as driven by these things. And on the other hand, that economic choices are being made on a commercial basis. And that's why no matter how many times people of different parties and different administrations or appointments fail on this front, you want to have a system of scrutiny and rules and presumptions that discourages our elected officials from being so overt about it. I think, to be fair, the Trump administration and the sons of President Trump and Secretary Lutnick and the Middle East negotiator guy and all these people, they're being very open. And I think that in one sense does matter, like they are with crypto. But in another sense, that doesn't solve the problem, because then the perception is still people are being favored, decisions are being made on a bad basis. You have to offer gold crowns or hotel deals to make things happen. And
transparency doesn't necessarily negate actions, right?
Yeah. Well said.
Dr. Posen, you said it's not the end of the world if we're in a situation such as this, or in a society such as this.
But it's not the end of the world. Yeah.
But I'm wondering if there are potentially long-term economic repercussions that happen in societies that don't necessarily have the same rules in place. If we can look to history or modern history to get an understanding of what the implications of that could be in the U.S. in your view.
Oh, I think they're enormous. I think then, because it's the U.S., which, as I've argued, Tim, has been the linchpin of the rules-based, law-based system of economies since World War II, it has repercussions around the world, because it means the U.S. is not only enforcing the norms against this kind of corruption or perceived corruption or tied political choice-making. It means that the U.S. is setting an example that you can get away with it, and other people should get away with it. And it breaks down the regimes and the operating principles we have to deter these things. So when I say it's not the end of the world, I don't mean to suggest it's not very harmful. It will reduce the returns on capital. It will reduce the ability of average people and normal businesses to get access to opportunities. It will divide the world. It will increase instability in investment markets. It will waste public money. It's bad in a lot of ways. I just merely want to be very clear that though it's unusual for the U.S. in the last 100+ years to behave this way, in our long ago history and in other countries around the world, this has taken place, and that there have been much smaller, much less overt examples of this by previous U.S. administrations.
Well, and just thinking about all you've just said, Dr. Posen, and then kind of squaring that with the recent government shutdown and the domestic issues that kind of came to the forefront, the 1 in 8 Americans who are on some kind of food assistance or food stamps, the amount of Americans that are just struggling to put food on their table, a roof over their head. I want to bring it down then with so much focus on global issues. And some would say when you're president, you have to look beyond the U.S. borders as well as within the U.S. borders. But having said that, what is it that, is maybe being ignored in your view domestically that's really got to be addressed?
Again, you're asking very profound questions. I'll just say that in an enlightened administration, the reason you get involved in the rest of the world is because it ultimately is if you set up a rest of the world that feels safer and less corrupt and more stable and less subject to disease and refugee flows and wars, that's ultimately to the benefit of the average American. And if you have open and free commerce on a rules-based basis, that raises American opportunities and American citizens' purchasing power. So I agree with you. There's a question of how you prioritize, and this goes to the point with Saudi. I'm not sure that should be the biggest priority of an American administration right now. It's fine. You can walk and chew gum. It can be one of the things. So when you say what's in the domestic front, I think the removal of healthcare support, subsidies and access to Medicaid and to all these Obamacare-related things is going to materially affect the health and well-being of millions of human beings in the U.S. And that is bad economically, but it's bad in human terms. I think the reduction of options through the anti-migration policies, through other policies that make it so more people, mostly women in late middle age, have to stay home to be caregivers to elders and to children and to disabled people is materially bad for humans and is a huge pressure on people. And I think the combination of anti-migration policy, attacks on the Fed, tariffs, deal-making, some of which looks corrupt, all adds to a more inflationary environment, which reduces real incomes for people. So there's a whole bunch of things on the domestic front. But I just want to say that it's not about choosing the global versus the domestic. It's about choosing the self-interested versus the public welfare.
I think we need to leave it there. That I got to say, sometimes I'm in awe of our guests, and I certainly am on this Tuesday. Dr. Posen, thank you so much. Really appreciate all we could.
Thank you for having me.
Same here. Thank you for joining us. Dr. Adam Posen, president of the Peterson Institute for International Economics. Just a quick check on the trade. We're definitely off our worst levels of the session. Let's toss it back to Charlie Pellet with an update on the trade and some of your top business stories. Hey, Charlie.
Thank you very much, Carol Master. Indeed, worst level of the day. We were down 1.5% right now, looking at a drop on the S&P of 0.5%. Just about 90 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell. Earnings, of course, tomorrow out of NVIDIA. Stocks lower across the board. NVIDIA, by the way, down 1.8% right now, with the S&P down 30 points, 66.42 where we stand, down 0.5%. We are looking at a sell-off in the world's largest tech companies. That is driving stocks toward their longest slide worldwide since August. That would be 4 in a row. The Dow now down 0.8%. NASDAQ Composite Index also down 0.8%. But interestingly, the Russell 2000 Index of small cap shares holding on to a gain now of 0.6%. 10-year yield 4.12%, but the 2-year 3.58%. Gold is up 0.7%, $40.74 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude $60.73 a barrel, up 1.4%, and Bitcoin now up 1.6%, 93,272 on Bitcoin. After earnings, Home Depot down 4.5%, rival Lowe's down 1.1%, and repeating an earlier headline, Paramount says that Variety report of a Warner Brothers Discovery bid is, quote, inaccurate. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Carol Massar, Tim Stenovec, live here on Bloomberg Businessweek Daily. A vote has been going on in the U.S. House of Representatives on legislation requiring the release of Justice Department files on Jeffrey Epstein. That has been going on. It looks like it is still happening, or maybe just wrapping. We're waiting to see. Still happening. We still see the votes moving. This is HR 4405. And right now, the yeas among Republicans and Democrats combined are number 337. Still, 50 Republicans have not voted. 44 Democrats have not voted. So 93 votes remain. We're just watching this play out in real time right now. 341 votes to the yay. 1 vote to the nay. This is for HR 4405. All right. And keep in mind that this measure will need to pass also once it gets through the House. If indeed it does, we'll need to pass the Republican-led Senate before becoming law. So there is a lot going on. And what's interesting is, keep in mind that President Trump has also initiated a Department of Justice investigation, which could enable him to delay the release of key files, even if the measure becomes law. So that happened on Friday. Yeah, you can see if you're watching on TV or YouTube, the votes continue to come in. 361 to support HR 4405, 1 nay still, Carol, 67 combined Republicans and Democrats have not voted at this point. All right, so interesting. And this has certainly been an issue that has been, I think it's safe to say, many say, plaguing certainly the White House and President Trump. He was asked about it earlier today in his joint meeting at the White House with MBS, Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia. So that came up in a question, I should say, not that they addressed it directly, but it was certainly asked by the reporters in the room. Representative Thomas Massey is a hardline conservative who has previously sparred with the president. He has helped spearhead the legislative effort to force the files release. He has suggested the president has been complicit in a cover-up. So there's been a lot. What's been interesting, I think, is, Tim, to watch Republicans move to also be supportive of a release of these files. I want to bring in Bloomberg News senior editor Wendy Benjaminson. She joins us from Washington, D.C. right now. Wendy, we're going to keep the tally up there, and we'll bring you official numbers as soon as we get them. But right now, this certainly is on track to pass the House. This is the bill to force Epstein files release. Does the House actually need to vote on this, or could the president just do this if he wanted to?
Oh, yes, absolutely. The president could have just ordered the Justice Department to release the files, but instead he is taking this path. And at this point, with the number of votes they have, there's no way it's not going to pass. It has essentially passed. Even if all 50 Republicans vote no, they have enough votes. So it has basically, or in a few minutes, will pass the House. But then here's where the chess game gets interesting. Then, as I heard Carol saying a moment ago, it goes to the Senate, where Johnson, the House Speaker, said earlier today he would hope that the Senate bill would be amendable, because the House bill that's passing just says the Justice Department must release these, and they could be held in contempt of Congress if not. They must have no redactions, no editing, nothing. We just get the full, unadulterated files. The Senate could amend that. The Senate could amend that so that they can redact sensitive information or whatever information the Senate decides to do. They may not. They may decide that since President Trump has said he doesn't care, release them all, that they will do that. But the smart money seems to be that something like that will happen. And then Trump doesn't have to sign the bill. If he changes his mind, he doesn't have to sign it. He can veto it or pocket veto it. And then the other thing is the Justice Department could also say, as Carol also smartly said a moment ago, that now they've been ordered to investigate the Democrats that are involved, and this is an active investigation, and it's unfair to everybody if we release any information about this at this time. So there are a lot of games that could be played here. So we're not sure that even with that heartbreaking victim's testimony from this morning and last night's football game, that that we're going to get the files.
I mean, it's funny, like what's going on within the Republican Party, Wendy, right now in terms of support to have them released, not have them released, or have them released with, make it amendable?
Are you talking about sort of the Thomas Massey and Marjorie Taylor Greene wing versus Speaker Johnson?
Correct.
That's kind of civil war that's happening right now.
Yeah, like what I'm curious about Republicans even supporting it at all.
Well, Donald Trump gave them permission to. And so it's, the House in particular, the Senate also, all Republicans, but the House in particular is responding to an audience of one these days, and that one is Donald Trump. And so when he didn't want the files to be released, they wouldn't swear in Representative Grijalva, who would have been the last Democratic vote needed to force this vote that is happening right now. So he didn't want them out. They went to extraordinary measures to make him happy, to do what he wanted. And now, Sunday night, he said, go ahead, release them, I don't care. So now everyone's in favor of releasing them. And then if we do see amendments in the Senate or he doesn't sign it, watch for a flip back from these Republicans. Also, there's another thing here. The entire House of Representatives is up for re-election next year in the midterms. Right. Nobody wants to be, oh yes, I wanted to keep the Jeffrey Epstein files secret. That's just not a message you go to town halls with.
According to the tally that we're seeing, there is one Republican who's voted against H.R. 4405 right now. We're still waiting for the final numbers to come in. Does seem like 9 still have not voted, 5 Republicans and 4 Democrats. But do we know who voted against it?
I mean, the House appears to have enough votes, but yeah.
It absolutely has enough votes. This has effectively passed the House. That one nay vote, I don't know at the moment who it is.
I would imagine the attack ads are getting ready.
Well, yes, or, somebody will come over to him and he or she can change their vote. I mean, until that gavel hits, there's always that last-minute wrangling that goes on where someone pulls them aside and says, what the heck are you doing? Go change your vote. And it's like, oh, I voted no? Okay. And they'll change it.
Wendy, without being controversial, here we are just coming off a government shutdown. I keep going to this because I still think about the food stamps, how many Americans were on it, who weren't getting it, kind of the tough situations that some Americans are put in. I mean, I'm thinking about what Congress should be really doing domestically to help Americans, and maybe what this president promised many Americans to do. And here we are spending an awful lot of time talking about Jeffrey Epstein. All of the victims, I think we all have compassion for them. But I'm just wondering, what business is not getting done that would help more Americans at this point?
Well, there's so many things that could be getting done. You're right, but this is a vote that was started in the 24 campaign when Donald Trump said to his base, "I'm going to get the Epstein files released. We're going to finally figure out, who was involved. We're going to release the client list, which now may or may not even exist." And so the MAGA base, one of the reasons they voted for Donald Trump is that this conspiracy about all these supposed, billionaires and presidents and princes and all these very, very important, influential people who may have been involved in this horrendous crime. They really want to see those files released. So this is something that voters, yes, do want. On the list of priorities of voters, this might not be at the top of the list. But with the shutdown resolved, to your point, the more important policy move now would be to do something about health care, because they are going to have a vote in mid-December, on extending the ACA health subsidies. And the president right now is saying only just send checks to people. That's the only healthcare fix I want to see. And so it's going to be very interesting to see how that vote goes, considering what we've been talking about today and how they want to act on behalf of the president.
Well, so glad we could get some time with you to just weigh in on kind of where we are. As you said, it does appear that we have enough votes, or at least the House has enough votes to pass this legislation requiring the release of Justice Department files on Jeffrey Epstein. Wendy, thank you. Wendy Benjaminson, she's senior editor at Bloomberg News. She joins us from our Washington, D.C. bureau.
Hey, we are just shy of 1 hour and 20 minutes from the close of equity trading here, and we're seeing some buying late in the session. The S&P 500 down now only 0.2%. The NASDAQ composite down right now 0.5%. The Dow down 0.6%. The NASDAQ 100 down 0.5 percentage point. Earlier in the session was down over 2%. So seeing a significant improvement there, at least if you're long this market. If you take a deep dive into the S&P 500, only three groups three industry groups are actually in the red: consumer discretionary, information technology, and industrials. Consumer discretionary really being dragged down 1.5%. Communication services, though, up a full percentage point.
Kind of fascinating, though, as you mentioned, when you look in the groups, we've got, 328 names in that S&P, actually higher, 174 the downside, despite what feels like kind of a downtrodden day. Having said that, you look at shares of Plug Power, and man, they are flying in today's session, up as much as 9.3%. Right now, a gain of about 7.5%, rallying in what feels, like I said, a bit of a downtrodden market. Keep in mind, shares of Plug Power have dropped about 23% in the past three trading sessions. They're off about 21% since the company reported earnings back on November 10th. Those earnings, Tim, by the way, both earnings and sales topped estimates. I should also point out there's a lot of negative sentiment on this stock. 22% of the float is short.
I want to bring in Andy Marsh. He's CEO of the $3.1 billion market cap green hydrogen company Plug Power, talking all about recent earnings and the outlook for the hydrogen power market. Plug Power provides hydrogen products, including electrolyzers, hydrogen transport storage, and dispensing solutions, and more. He joins us from New York. Andy, the past quarter, Carol went through some of the numbers, the outlook as well. What are the highlights here? I mean, give us the outlook moving forward, your view, and why you're optimistic.
Well, Tim, we're having an investor day today for Plug Symposium. And I think off the bat is that we see sales growth. When you look at our earnings, we did approximately $177 million in revenue. We expect that we'll be at $215 million in revenue in the fourth quarter here. That'll get us to 0% gross margin, which is on track with what we're focusing on with our Project Quantum Leap. And it really positions us to be able to achieve EBITDA's break even by the fourth quarter of next year.
Andy, hang on for 1 second. We just want to mention some headlines crossing the Bloomberg terminal. The U.S. House of Representatives does pass that bill directing the Department of Justice to release the files on Jeffrey Epstein. We had said just moments ago that it appeared they had all the votes. So that indeed just crossing the Bloomberg terminal. Now it moves on to the U.S. Senate. Another redhead crossing the Bloomberg terminal. This also about news out of Washington. The U.S. does plan to approve the sale of chips to the Saudi AI venture Humane. The U.S. plans to greenlight the first sales of advanced AI chips to the Saudi Arabian AI firm Humane. This, according to people familiar with the matter, making a win for the state-backed venture as Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman meets with U.S. President Donald Trump. All right, and as you know, we are talking with Andy Marsh, Chief Executive Officer of Plug Power. Andy, forgive us. There's a lot of news coming at all of us. Speaking of news coming at all of us, we reported last week, our Bloomberg NEF team reported out that oil and gas major ExxonMobil might pause its blue hydrogen project in Baytown, Texas, due to government subsidy cuts and insufficient buyers for the clean fuel. Might hydrogen and Plug Power be just too early to thrive and survive?
Well, the world's a lot bigger than Texas and a lot bigger than the United States. So much of our activity is actually global. Now, we've grown our electrolyzer business, which produces green hydrogen, from $5 million in 2023 and targeting $200 million this year. We're doing projects with large oil companies in Europe, people like BP, Iberdrola, as well as with Galp in Portugal. So the climate in the U.S. may not be as exciting, climate around the world is, we see continual growth. We've been at the Plug Symposium here today. I heard from High 24, which is an investment fund, and they're talking about all the projects they see are going on around the world, which will support the development of green hydrogen. And it's the largest investor fund in the world for hydrogen.
Hey, Andy, Carol and I were talking about what you do, and part of your business at Plug Power is using electrolyzers. So essentially creating hydrogen and oxygen, splitting water into hydrogen and oxygen. It's energy intensive, and this is in an environment where we're seeing power costs go higher as a result of investments in AI, increased use of electricity, not just by companies, but by consumers as well. How do you control costs when it comes to electrolyzing?
Well, Tim, that's actually one of our advantages of our technology. You can turn it on and off. One item you're not pinpointing is that, for example, in Germany, in the month of May, 17.5% of the time, the grid was zero or negative as far as costs. You could be using that time to generate hydrogen, low cost and competitive with natural gas. So I think it depends where you are in the world, but as grids become more and more renewables, and that's happening in Europe, as well as with nuclear power, hydrogen's actually a great flexible load. Electrolyzers are a great flexible load on the grid. And then you combine that with the fact that regulations around the world are really forcing people to reduce their carbon footprint. May not be the way happening in the US at the moment, but it is happening. I spent a week in Australia. It was just fascinating, the commitment you see around the world for green hydrogen.
Well, that's what I want to ask you, Andy. We've only got maybe a minute and a half, 2 minutes left here. So, here we are on a day where we're seeing the United States and Saudi's Mohammed bin Salman, in the White House. Is it your expectation that your business, where the growth is, it's shifting from the U.S. to outside the United States? I know you guys have something that you just did in the U.K. So I'm just curious, is that the focus? Is that where the growth is?
I think the electrolyzer business, there actually is growth there in the United States. We see European players coming to the U.S. to leverage the renewable power to generate RNG to ship overseas. But we also have a good business in the United States with our material handling business. We expect growth with our big customers this year. People in 2026, people like Amazon and Walmart. So, the recent legislation in July of 2025 actually put an investment tax credit in for fuel cells that's 30% from 26 to 32, which is a real boom to us in this industry. So we're feeling pretty good about the United States with our fuel cell business and feeling really good about our electrolyzer business in Europe, Australia, and other places around the world.
You mentioned some of your customers: Walmart, Amazon, Home Depot, Airbus, AT&T, Alphabet, I should say, and more, UPS. How do you get those customers to use more hydrogen-powered products and move away from fossil fuels?
I can tell you the reason Walmart uses it, because we help them to move 8% more goods per hour. There's a real value proposition there. We also help them take power off the grid. We've been talking about the grid, but that power can be used to power freezers, which allow them to sell more frozen foods, which is a real growth opportunity for them and for all food providers. We have 72,000 units out there in the United States. We've built 285 fueling stations. We've been able to convince them. So the value proposition is clear.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Hey, always good to check in with what you're up to, Andy. Thank you. Andy Marsh, he's Chief Executive Officer of Plug Power. As we mentioned, the stock, which has seen some selling pressure over the last few days, actually getting a bump to the upside. It is up, Tim, about 8%.
Hey, quick update to the trade. As we mentioned just a few minutes ago, seeing some buying in the last hour and 10 minutes of today's trade. The S&P 500 down 0.2%. The NASDAQ down 0.5 percentage point. The Dow, Carol, down 0.6%.
I just want want to mention, too, a great story on the Bloomberg. Emily Grafeo, among those reporting it out, that the malaise sweeping financial markets globally, though, is also creeping into credit markets. Risk premiums on corporate bonds and junk bonds are hovering near their highest levels in weeks. So definitely a different narrative. So a lot to talk about with our next guest. It is our weekly discussion on women, money, and power, where we explore the economic implications of the wealth shift of money to women and really how to navigate them. We welcome Stephanie Guild. She's Chief Investment Officer at Robinhood Markets. She's here in studio. Stephanie, good to have you here. There's a lot going on. I kind of say that. Tim and I say that. It feels like almost every day. Let's start broadly with the market environment. We've seen quite a pullback and a lot of risk on assets, whether it's the Mag 7, whether it's NVIDIA, whether it's semiconductors, whether it's Bitcoin. Is this a market reset, a sell-off, or a market crash that we're kind of getting near, or neither?
I think
or none of the above.
I think it's correction. So I don't know if one of those was part of that. But I think it's a healthy correction. You get them every 1 to 2 years. Sometimes we forget that. And we just got off of a period of no data. Valuations had gotten really high, and there is a legitimate question around how much companies are spending versus how much they're making in terms of cash flow, and in the largest companies. So that's going to affect the broader market.
So you're talking about big tech and AI.
I'm talking about big tech and AI, and obviously Amazon's borrowing, outsizing it to $15 billion doesn't necessarily help that narrative. So I think you just need to start seeing proof that there's a return on invested capital. There are other things that are working, though, in the market.
We'll get to some of the things that are working, but I want to know what the proof would look like in your view. What do you need to see from some of these companies to show, okay, the money that we're spending is actually paying off?
I think you need to start seeing money from the actual investments that they're making in terms of like AI investments, how it actually reaches the consumer, how it reaches enterprise. Like we know in the private area, Anthropic is doing a little bit more revenue, right? Because they're enterprise focused versus like an open AI that's more consumer focused. So I think if people are investing money in places that are going to prove out that revenue comes, I think the other thing is that the change in the one big beautiful bill, right, gave that 100% expensing. And that's kind of something that I'm looking forward to in the future as well, which is like, that's not just AI investing, but also in other tech and infrastructure. And like that can start to lift the market too.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about, you shared some notes with our producer, Ariel Agami, and you said, or you noted, global markets have fundamentally changed. Individual investors are now a core part of the financial ecosystem, reshaping how capital markets function. What was once the domain of institutions is now open and accessible to millions of individuals worldwide. I understand where you're coming from, but I was thinking about what Dr. Adam Posen, president of the Peterson Institute for International Economics, said coming off of the meeting between President Trump and Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia, that this idea that capital flows actually are being controlled to some extent by moves out of the White House, whether it's taking stakes in companies, or it's the AI spend that is controlling so much, or it's what some say is a transactional White House where invest here and you get this. It's very different in some regard, in a lot of ways from what we've had in the past.
I've personally never watched so many political shows in my career of over 20 years. Like that is part of what you have to know as an investor.
But it makes me question, like, do individual investors really still have a lot to say here?
I think they do, but not necessarily in the biggest companies. Like I think they actually are seeing, some of the individual investors I think are seeing things before the institutional investors, and that many are so aligned with the White House and what they're doing that they're like, this is what I think the future is. I also think that it's not necessarily showing up in the largest companies. There are other companies, smaller ones, that they kind of gather together and sort of community invest. Those aren't the biggest companies, but they are ones that are more volatile, but they have a longer time horizon. Most of the people on our platform are average age of 35. More than 2/3 of our company is millennials and Gen Z. So that's what, I think it's the same thing as being on a trading desk and kind of talking about investment ideas together. Now they're in X doing the same thing.
And Steph, they're probably watching crypto closely too. Yes. Bitcoin down 25 to 30%, depending on when you look at it, from those all-time highs just last month.
Yeah.
What does that do? Not for your customer and not for the Robinhood user, but what does that do for sentiment, or does it give any indication of sentiment?
I think it does, because you have seen actually some really big institutions sell some large positions too recently, not just in Bitcoin, but obviously in NVIDIA and other names. I think but then there was buyers too from Berkshire Hathaway. I think those that play in the crypto space are very used to large swings. And they're, I think there's kind of a meme out there that says if you're like when stock investors have a big drag down, they're like, the crypto investors are like, welcome to the way it feels. So I actually think they're kind of used to it. We haven't really seen a huge shift. If anything, most of our customers, when they're investing, they play the volatility in that when it goes up a lot, they'll trim their positions. When it goes down a lot, they do add.
We have to jump. So much going on. Come back soon because we would love to continue this. Stephanie Guild, Chief Investment Officer at Robinhood Markets. Hey, as we mentioned, nearly all House Republicans voted to compel the Justice Department to release its files on sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein. We did have a vote in the House just happening. Hey, let's head back to D.C. and the co-host of Balance of Power, Joe Mathieu. Joe, what's next? Off to the Senate?
Well, that's right. I think that's what the expectation is. And John Thune hasn't given us a real sense of what he wants to do there, Carol. But an overwhelming vote like this kind of leaves little option. And we have heard from some Senate Republicans that they would be willing to vote yes on this as well. So the next step would be the Senate, where it would clearly pass. The president told Republicans to vote for this, and that Democrats likely will as well. And the president has also said he will sign it. The question is what happens then, because knowing that the president has compelled the Department of Justice to investigate some Democrats, including Bill Clinton in this case, the DOJ could simply say, hey, we understand the vote, but we can't release anything because this is an ongoing investigation, a smokescreen, as some have called it here. And there's a question about whether or not this is how this ends. And maybe that's why, in fact, the president decided at the last minute to go for this. I will mention, by the way, the one House member who voted against this, Republican Clay Higgins of Louisiana, just now writing on X, I have been a principled no on this bill from the beginning. What was wrong with the bill 3 months ago is still wrong today. It abandons 250 years of criminal justice procedure in America. He is, of course, a staunch Trump ally, and interesting to see the one person to stand up to vote no on this piece of legislation.
God, it's all interesting, it feels like, and you're covering it all. And we know you'll be back again at 5 p.m. Wall Street time as Balance of Power goes into the evening hours. Joe Mathieu, thank you so much. He is co-host of Balance of Power. That does it for Tim and me. We're sticking around right here on Bloomberg Businessweek Daily.